Hello friends, welcome back at Lit eCity YouTube channel, the one-stop destination for English learning resources. दोस्तों आज हम डिस्कस करने वाले हैं एक बहुत ही इम्पॉर्टेंट क्रिटिकल एसे written by the American literary critic Edmund Wilson. The title of the essay is Marxism and Literature. जैसा कि टाइटल आइडिया देता है, द essay is about the relationship between the political social theory of Marxism and literature and their reciprocal relationship. एडमंड विल्सन ने इस ऐसे के अंदर he has thrown light on the relationship between these two very different kind of ideologies. One is about political, social, economic, and the other one is literature, which seems to be secular from any kind of ideology. पूरी हिस्ट्री को उन्होंने डिस्कस करा है. जो मेजर थिंकर्स हैं मार्क्सिज्म से रिलेटेड, उनका लिटरेचर को लेकर क्या व्यू पॉइंट था और किस तरह से द वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड हैज सीन लिटरेचर थ्रू द लेंस ऑफ मार्क्सिज्म, ये सारे इस ऐसे के अंदर, इस क्रिटिकल ऐसे के अंदर डिस्कस करें. तो स्टार्ट करते हैं आज का ऐसे. पहले एक ब्रीफ इंट्रोडक्शन टू द एसेइस्ट. नाउ फ्रेंड्स, एडमंड विल्सन was one of the most influential American literary critics of the 20th century. He was an essayist, a columnist, and cultural commentator also. He has a knack of picking up very important topics and delivering some new perspective on these topics. In fact, he was one of the first few who approached the of examining literature within its historical, social, and biographical context. We are talking about 20th century when there are so many approaches to study literature, और उसके अंदर विल्सन ने once again the traditional approach. Context became more important to Wilson rather than the text itself. And he believed that understanding a writer's life, the historical period in which the writer is writing, and social circumstances that shape a work, they are also essential to understand the particular work. So, जो हम तीन basic frames मानते हैं, one is totally depending upon the biographical criticism, thinking about the writer. The one is totally focusing on the reader's point of view while the reader is assessing a work. And the third one is the text, focus is only on the text. विल्सन ने इन तीनों से परे जाकर he presented that there is context that is also important, so that is his contribution. Now his groundbreaking work, his most important critical work is Axel's Castle, a study in the imaginative literature of 1870 to 1930. This work examined the symbolist movement, that is the early 20th century in literature, and he analyzed writers including W.B. Yeats, Paul Valery, T.S. Eliot, Marcel Proust and James Joyce. इन सब writers को जाना जाता है use of deep symbolism, complex symbolism, और एडमंड विल्सन ने इन सब को स्टडी करा है अपने इस वर्क के अंदर. Now coming to the essay, जो present essay है Marxism and Literature. It first appeared in 1937 in his book collection of essays, The Triple Thinkers, 10 essays on literary subjects. तो ये एक collection था जिसके अंदर ये essay first time publish हुआ था. Then actually it was written during a very crucial period. You can see that 1937, it was the decade of Great Depression, or we can say economic decline, especially in American economic world, the rise of fascism in Europe, that is a kind of एक तरह का reaction था against the barbarity and the injustice of First World War. There were certain powers like Italy and Germany who were feeling victimized, and there was a rise of fascism which lay seed for the upcoming Second World War. And also, the world was divided into ideological debates about capitalism, socialism, communism, which particular ideology is better for the world, better for a particular nation. And the world was hugely divided in these ideological debates. So it was pertinent to ask certain questions regarding literature also. Now, this essay represents Wilson's attempt to examine how Marxist theory, particularly its ideas about how economics, class struggle, historical materialism, they could be applied to the study of literature. जैसे मैंने आपको बताया, for Wilson, the context was also important. Ideology was also important. Later, we see in the same century, in later part, how the ideas coming from feminism, from post-colonial theory, they also become a part of literary understanding. Similarly, Wilson was one of the first few who tried to understand literature through the lens of political social ideology, especially Marxism. Now, Wilson actually wanted to show that while economic and social factors, they certainly influence literature. कोई भी जो literature होता है वो एक particular milieu के अंदर लिखा जाता है. उस समय का economic, social factors, condition, they definitely influence the writings. But he also pointed out that literary works cannot be reduced to mere byproducts of economic conditions or class interest. This was the proposition of the Marxist thinkers. They considered that literature is just a byproduct of a particular social condition, of a particular economic condition. Now, here, Edmund Wilson is different, and he says that literature may be influenced by the social material conditions, but literature has its own way of asserting itself. Literature is in somewhat above the social, the material, the economic conditions of a society. ये ऐसे attempt है Edmund Wilson का to show that how literature cannot be completely bound to the social materialistic conditions of the world of the time. चलिए शुरू करते हैं इस ऐसे को critically analyze करने का. Now, Edmund Wilson begins the essay. He begins the essay by examining how literature and art, they function within dialectical materialism. Now, ये जो term है dialectical materialism, it is very important to understand here. It was actually a philosophical approach. Initially, it was proposed by the German philosopher Hegel, and later it was adopted by Marx and Engels, those two philosophers who basically shaped the Marxist ideas. Now, dialectical materialism is a way of understanding reality that focuses on how material condition, materialism, material condition, like economic structures, those materialistic things which makes the world run on the economic basis. And dialectical means a process of conflicts where there is a point, then there is a counterpoint, and there is a struggle, and after point and counterpoint they struggle with each other, there is a synthesis, a new point is created. This process goes on continuously. Basically, dialectical means a dialogue. So dialogue is between two opposing forces. So there is always seeds of conflicts present in a society. एक समाज में हमेशा conflict के seeds रहते हैं, धीरे धीरे ये grow up होते रहते हैं. Then there is a full fledged conflict, and after a conflict a new equation, a new kind of thing is reached. लेकिन वापस से एक नए seeds of conflict arise होते हैं. So dialectical materialism is the way, is a philosophical approach through which Marx and Engels try to understand the society. Now Wilson explains that Marx and Engels, though they thought that dialectical materialism is behind every shape of society, still they didn't see art as simply reflecting economic conditions passively. यहां ये इंपॉर्टेंट है कि विल्सन बताना चाह रहे हैं द फाउंडर्स ऑफ द मार्क्सिस्ट थियरी, बोथ मार्क्स एंड एंजल्स, दे वर नॉट सो मच टेकन बाय द role of economics or economic condition in shaping of literature. वो ये मानते थे कि literature is not a passive entity, it is not just a reflection of the economic conditions. Rather, they viewed it as an active component within the larger social system. वो सोशल सिस्टम जिसमें एजुकेशन, गवर्नमेंट, लिटरेचर, रिलीजन, ये सारी चीजें एक्टिवली प्ले करती हैं अपना अपना रोल, उसी में लिटरेचर इज नॉट जस्ट a shadow, a passive shadow, but rather it is an active component which shapes society. For this, they try to give their base superstructure model. According to this model, human societies are formed by modes of production. Now, what are modes of production? Mode of production is how goods, how in a society products are produced and distributed and who controls them, and in a particular country and time period. Now, according to this particular theory, according to this base structure model, the base is the modes of production, and on this base a superstructure emerges. इस सुपरस्ट्रक्चर के अंदर पॉलिटिक्स, फिलॉसफी, लॉ, लिटरेचर, रिलीजन, आर्ट, ये सारे क्या हैं? दे आर द बाय प्रोडक्ट्स ऑफ द बेस. मतलब इकोनॉमिक कंडीशंस, द मोड्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन, दे आर द फाउंडेशन, दे आर द नींव, दे आर द बेस. और इस बेस के ऊपर एक सुपर स्ट्रक्चर, चाहे वो रिलीजन का हो, चाहे वो आर्ट हो, चाहे वो लॉ हो, चाहे वो पॉलिटिक्स हो, वो वहीं पर क्रिएट होता है. Now, Marx and Engels stressed that the superstructure, जिसके अंदर कल्चरल एक्टिविटीज भी हैं, देखिए एक हाउस जो बेस पर बनता है, दैट हाउस डिपेंड्स अपॉन द बेस ओनली, फाउंडेशन ओनली, बट इट इज नॉट द केस विद द सुपरस्ट्रक्चर्स जिसकी बात मार्क्स और एंजल्स करते हैं. इट इज नॉट कंप्लीटली कंट्रोल्ड बाय इकोनॉमिक्स. इट इज, वहां से बेस जरूर है, लेकिन इसका मतलब यह नहीं है कि बेस कंप्लीटली कंट्रोल्स द सुपरस्ट्रक्चर्स. इट मेंटेन्स सम इंडिपेंडेंस एंड आल्सो कैन इन्फ्लुएंस द इकोनॉमिक बेस. सो द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन द बेस एंड द सुपरस्ट्रक्चर इज रेसिप्रोकल. बेस से सुपरस्ट्रक्चर बनता है, तो सुपरस्ट्रक्चर भी कहीं ना कहीं बेस को इन्फ्लुएंस करता है. In practice, actually, each cultural field attempts to establish autonomy from the class origin. आप ये समझ सकते हैं कि सुपर स्ट्रक्चर जो है वो निकलकर तो बेस से आया है, लेकिन वो अपने आप को असर्ट करना चाहता है, अपने आप को ऑटोनॉमस करना चाहता है, फ्री करना चाहता है उस बेस से जिससे वो एमर्ज हुआ है, और वो अपनी प्रोफेशनल कम्युनिटीज के लिए बनाता है. राइटर्स की, पॉलिटिशियंस की, एजुकेटर्स की, रिलीजियस जो जिनके पास पावर्स होती हैं उनकी, जिनके अपने स्टैंडर्ड्स होते हैं, जिनकी अपनी वैल्यूज होती हैं, एंड विच इंक्लूड मेंबर्स फ्रॉम द डिफरेंट स्ट्रेटा, डिफरेंट क्लासेस ऑफ द सोसाइटी. तो वो एक ऑर्गेनाइज्ड ग्रुप्स बनाते हैं जो कुछ सेट ऑफ रूल्स लेकर आते हैं, जो कुछ पर्टिकुलर मेथड्स लेकर आते हैं, एंड दिस इज हाउ दे ट्राई टू गेन ऑटोनॉमी. वो इस मामले में कुछ ऑटोनॉमी अचीव करना चाहते हैं. Now, in a letter to Hans Stockenberg, Engels explained that all cultural areas react upon one another and upon the economic base. कहने का मतलब ये हुआ कि ये सारे जो कंपोनेंट्स हैं एक सोसाइटी के, जिसमें लॉ भी है, लिटरेचर भी है, रिलीजन भी है, लॉ भी है, पॉलिटिक्स भी है, और बेस तो इकोनॉमिक्स है ही, दे ऑल आर लाइक मूविंग स्टोन्स, जो एक दूसरे से लगातार क्या करते रहते हैं, टकराते रहते हैं, रिएक्ट करते रहते हैं, और साथ ही बेस से भी टकराते रहते हैं. सो देयर एग्जिस्ट अ रेसिप्रोकल इंटरैक्शन विद इन अ फंडामेंटल इकोनॉमिक नेसेसिटी. फंडामेंटल इकोनॉमिक नेसेसिटी का मतलब यह है कि बेस तो इकोनॉमिक है, लेकिन ये सब चीजें, ये सारे के सारे एक दूसरे के साथ क्या करते रहते हैं, इंटरैक्शन करते रहते हैं. आर्ट्स एंड पॉलिटिक्स कैन इंपैक्ट द इकोनॉमी. हम ऐसा नहीं मान सकते कि केवल इकोनॉमी ही आर्ट और पॉलिटिक्स को जन्म देती है. दीज टू कैन आल्सो इंपैक्ट द इकोनॉमी जस्ट एज द इकोनॉमी शेप्स देम. नाउ इसका एक सबसे बढ़िया जो एक्सप्लेनेशन है वो आता है दैट ड्यूरिंग मेजर आर्टिस्टिक पीरियड्स लाइक Renaissance, like in England, Elizabethan period, the Romantic period, and at that particular period, at that particular fertile duration, art can achieve such strength and insight that it affects all aspects of life in that era. मतलब आर्ट इतना डोमिनेंट एक कोड बन जाता है कि इट इन्फ्लुएंस not just those who have interest in literature but all aspects of life. For example, an influential novel might inspire social reform, though the economy still determines the broader context for such influence. एक यहाँ छोटे से एग्जाम्पल से समझ सकते हैं. We know that how Dickens raises social issues through his novels. Oliver Twist जो उनका बहुत फेमस नॉवल था, it was about an orphan named Oliver Twist. इस नॉवल ने जो कंडीशन ऑफ द ऑर्फनेजेस प्रेजेंट करी, साथ ही प्रिजन्स का कुछ प्रेजेंट करा, इसका इतना इंपैक्ट हुआ दैट देयर वर डिमांड्स फॉर इंप्रूवमेंट इन द कंडीशन ऑफ द ऑर्फनेजेस. ये एक एग्जांपल है. लेकिन साथ ही एंजल्स ये भी बताते हैं कि इकोनॉमी स्टिल डिटरमाइंस. अभी भी ये नहीं हम इग्नोर कर सकते कि ब्रॉडर कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऐसे इन्फ्लुएंस का होने का सबसे जो मेजर जरिया रहेगा, बेस रहेगा, वो इकोनॉमिक्स ही रहेगा. इकोनॉमिक्स अलाउ करेगी तभी ये पॉसिबल होगा. नाउ देयर इज एन इंटरेस्टिंग पैराडॉक्स जिस पर एंजल्स बात करते हैं कि ग्रेट आर्ट थ्राइव्स इन सोशल सिस्टम दैट प्रोवाइड आर्टिस्ट विद रिसोर्सेज एंड सपोर्ट. ये एक बिल्कुल एस्टेब्लिश्ड फैक्ट है कि जब एक आर्टिस्ट को जिसके हाथ में पावर है उसका सपोर्ट मिल रहा हो, तो वो निश्चित रूप से वो पीरियड आर्टिस्ट के फ्लरिश के लिए सबसे बढ़िया होता है. बट आर्ट ऑफन डिटेरियोरेट्स व्हेन इट्स सपोर्टिंग सोशल सिस्टम फेल्स. ये भी साथ के साथ एक बात है कि जब उस सोसाइटी में जिसमें आर्ट को प्रमोट नहीं किया जा रहा हो, वो सोसाइटी के अंदर आर्टिस्ट का रोल और आर्ट दे बोथ स्टार्ट टू डिक्लाइन. इसको एक एग्जांपल के थ्रू एंजल्स ऐसे समझाते हैं कि द सेम आर्टिस्ट हु बेनिफिट्स फ्रॉम द सिस्टम थ्रू वेल्थ और पैट्रोनेज मे यूज देयर वर्क टू चैलेंज इट. जस्ट लाइक कंसिडर एन एग्जाम्पल, एक पर्टिकुलर रूलर है हु प्रोवाइड्स मनी एंड रिसोर्सेज एंड पैट्रोनेज टू द राइटर. तो राइटर नेचुरली उस जो किंग या क्वीन है या रूलर है उसकी प्रेज में, उसकी पॉलिसीज को सपोर्ट करने के लिए लिखेगा. बट देयर मे कम अ टाइम व्हेन द सेम राइटर हु हैज नाउ गेन पॉपुलैरिटी, हु हैज हिज और हर ओन सोर्सेज, वो क्या कर सकता है, he or she may undermine the certain policy, criticize the ruler, by writing stories that criticize inequality in the kingdom, even though they depend on that system to create their art. So this is the paradox. वो system जो art को support करता है, वही system को criticize किया जा सकता है उस art के द्वारा. This is what Engels want to highlight. Now, Marx and Engels, they differed significantly from their later followers in their approach to literary criticism. ये हम बाद में देखेंगे, जो इनके बाद में आए, लेनिन, ट्रॉट्स्की, उनका व्यू आर्ट को लेकर क्या था और मार्क और एंजल्स किस तरह से इस मामले में बिल्कुल अलग थे. They did not create strict economic formula for judging art. They considered that economics and art are two separate areas, required different sensibility. तो कभी भी इकोनॉमिक्स के फार्मूला से आर्ट को जज नहीं किया जा सकता. They approached literature with artistic sensitivity, not ideological dogma. ऐसा नहीं था कि उनकी आइडियोलॉजी के अंदर जो लिटरेचर फिट हो रहा हो उस लिटरेचर को वो अप्रूव करते थे और बाकी को वो क्रिटिसाइज करते थे. They were very much of the view कि both are separate and both require different kind of appreciation to understand them. Actually, we must understand that both Marx and Engels, they were highly cultured men and they were greatly shaped, influenced by the final period of German classicism, which is also known as sunset of gaiety, late 18th and early 19th century. They were in their childhood years, formative years, when the influence of Goethe was very pervasive throughout the Germany. And that is why both attempted to be poets in their youth. That is what happens when a towering figure like Goethe is your national hero. So that is why they responded to imaginative work primarily on artistic merit rather than according to their ideology. बाद वाले जो Marxist critic थे, they can be blamed for this thing that they tried to understand literature only from the ideological point of view, but it was not the case with Marx and Engels. Both understand that literature has to be appreciated, has to be read from different perspective rather than the political or social ideology. Now, they both were critical of certain writers because of their ideological reasons. For example, they criticized Eugene Sue because she offered superficial petty bourgeois. Petty bourgeois is a lower middle class. The term is a French term used in Marxism to describe the lower middle class. And this particular writer, Eugene Sue, she offered very superficial, very not shallow kind of solution to social problems. They were also against Ferdinand Ferrigrat for abandoning communism for nationalism. He actually forsake the ideology and become a nationalist. And similarly, they were not very fond of Heinrich Heine because he sometimes used his work to flatter the authorities, which were against their principle. So ideologically, they were against these writers. But at the same times, they carefully separated the artist from the art. मतलब आर्टिस्ट हो गया पर्सन जिसके वो अंगेंस्ट थे और आर्ट हो गई उस पर्सन के द्वारा लिखे गए वर्क. Marx greatly admired the poet Heinrich Heine and asserted that poets are original who must be allowed to follow their own path. This shows that though they were ideologically against Heinrich Heine, but they appreciated, they praised the poet, his poetry. This shows that there was a distinction made by Marx and Engels regarding this concept. Engels especially warned socialist novelists against producing tendency literature. Tendency literature is propaganda literature. literature that is used to explicitly promote political message. That is actually a political message in garb of literature. कहने के लिए वो literature है, but the purpose of literature is not to enlighten but to give a political message. He advised that a novel's political idea should emerge naturally from its plot and characters and it shouldn't be forced. मतलब ऑर्गेनिकली अगर कोई नॉवल सोशल या पॉलिटिकल इशू को रेज कर रहा है, दैट इज फाइन, लेकिन नॉवल लिखा ही इसीलिए गया है, नॉवल हैज बिकम अ व्हीकल फॉर द पॉलिटिकल प्रमोशन, देन इट शुड नॉट बी प्रैक्टिस्ड, ऐसा एंजल्स का मानना था. व्हेन द सोशलिस्ट फर्डिनांड लजाले सेंट देम हिज हिस्टोरिकल ड्रामा फ्रांस वॉन सिकिंजन, this is the name of a drama, a historical drama. Both Marx and Engels, they first appreciated its emotional impact as both were moved by the play. उनको play बहुत अच्छा लगा, it has the movement जिसने इनको move करा. Then they applied their spatial historical point of view, analyzing that how Lassalle's own political views had led him to misinterpret the historical role of his hero. Lassalle was deeply influenced by his own ideology and he shaped the historical character of Franz von Sickingen according to his ideology. और ये चीज मार्क्स और एंजल्स को कम जची, and that is why they criticize, that is why they reach the conclusion that this work does not have the same artistic value and it lacks the proper understanding of the role of literature. Now, Marx and Engels also admired Greek writer Aeschylus for his grandeurs and defiance in Prometheus, Goethe, the German writer, for his universal genius despite his flaws, and Shakespeare, whom Marx knew by heart. This shows that writers across countries, across ideologies were admired by these two, and because they had, all these three had literary brilliance and they didn't try to draw social morals from their works. This shows they valued the writers for their artistic excellence and not for political ideas. Marx actually did not have a systematic explanation of art's relation to society. मार्क्स को कोई ऐसा कॉन्सेप्ट नहीं था कि इस तरह से आर्ट जो है सोसाइटी को इन्फ्लुएंस करती है या सोसाइटी और आर्ट के बीच में ये रिलेशन है. एंड ही सेज दैट art's great period, that those timelines when art flourished doesn't always correspond to economic development. For example, in his introduction to the critique of political economy, Marx noted कि जब ancient Greek art flourish हुई, that was the golden period of Greek literature and culture. It was relatively underdeveloped economic system. Economic point of view से उस समय इतना development नहीं था, but art and culture, they were at their peak, at their high point. This shows that they are not so closely interlinked with each other. दोनों एक दूसरे के साथ इस तरह से जुड़े हुए नहीं हैं. Marx and Engels did not view art primarily as a tool or weapon for political purposes, as they were influenced by the Renaissance idea of many-sided men like Leonardo da Vinci, who excelled in multiple fields like art, science and strategy. तो बेसिकली वो ये नहीं मान के चलते थे कि आर्ट या लिटरेचर can become a vehicle, a weapon for political purpose, because they thought a man may be a political ideologist, a man may be a statesman, but that same man can have literary potential also. तो उसके literary potential को literary potential रहने देना चाहिए, like the famous example of Leonardo da Vinci. Engels noted in his preface to Dialectic and Nature that the division of labor split human nature. जब से ये division of labor आया कि this work has to be done manually and those persons control modes of production, उसके बाद people के जो powers हैं, potential हैं, वो limited हो गए because they were forced to be skilled in particular specialized roles. Now, unlike Marx and Engels, we are moving ahead. ये दोनों मार्क्स और एंजल्स दे कंसिडर्ड लिटरेचर एंड पॉलिटिक्स और आइडियोलॉजी डिफरेंट, सेपरेट फ्रॉम ईच अदर. दोनों मान के चलते थे कि सोशल, इकोनॉमिक, मटेरियल कंडीशन दे इन्फ्लुएंस, दीज कंडीशंस इन्फ्लुएंस लिटरेचर, बट एट द सेम टाइम दोनों ये भी मान के चलते थे लिटरेचर हैज इट्स ओन स्पेशल रोल इन सोसाइटी. बोथ कंसिडर्ड दैट वी शुड नॉट जज अ राइटर on the basis of the ideology, but rather on the merit of the work. Now we come to the next generation, and here Edmund Wilson focuses on Russian ideologists and rulers like Lenin. Lenin was focused on fighting for the revolution during the Russian Revolution, and that is why both Marx and Engels, they were not fighting a revolution, they were giving certain ideas. While Lenin was a practitioner, उसने उन आइडियाज को बेस बनाकर रशिया में ज़ारिस्ट एम्पायर के अगेंस्ट रेवोल्यूशन करा. सो दिस शोज अ शिफ्ट टुवर्ड्स मोर नैरोली डिफाइंड रोल इन मार्क्सिस्ट प्रैक्टिस. मतलब यहां पर जो ब्रॉड यूनिवर्सल आइडियाज थे, दे वर लिमिटेड टू प्रैक्टिस, कि किनको हम प्रैक्टिस में यूज कर सकते हैं. मैक्सिम गॉर्की, another famous writer from Russia, he noted that Lenin was deeply moved by Beethoven's music, again a German musician, praising its superhuman beauty. But Lenin himself admitted, I can't listen to music too often. I can't listen because he thought that the music's emotional impact could distract him from the revolutionary work. Here comes the reason why Lenin found himself detached from the art or culture in general. He has a particular goal in his mind, and anything जो उसको उस goal से परे लेकर जाती, he basically tried to ignore or get away from that thing. In the similar fashion, Lenin enjoyed poetry and theater, and also he was not rigid like later Marxists in his taste. When young communists dismissed Pushkin because he was a bourgeois, a capitalist, or a middle class who owns the means of production writer, Lenin defended him as a superior poet compared to the revolutionary Mayakovsky. This shows the lineage of Marx and Engels. Like them, Lenin also thought that maybe Pushkin belonging to the middle class, maybe he was a bourgeois, but still his work has more powerful appeal to the heart rather than the socialist poet Mayakovsky. So this shows that still he thought that an artist should be respected for the art, not for the background. Now his preference for Pushkin, a classic poet, over the politically radical Mayakovsky, it indicates that he appreciated, like Marx and Engels, art for its universal value, not for just its revolutionary message. Gorky here also mentions that Lenin admired Tolstoy's War and Peace and praised Tolstoy as a colossus for his genius and for authentically portraying music, that is Russian terms for peasants. Once again, Tolstoy was an aristocratic by birth. Still, he admired War and Peace. Still, he thought that Tolstoy can write authentically about the poor peasant class. In his essays on Tolstoy, Lenin also analyzed Tolstoy's theory of non-resistance and mysticism. This shows that Lenin was not averse, he was not against writers coming from the aristocratic or the bourgeois class if their art hold merit. Now, Lenin saw Tolstoy's philosophy, which emphasized peace, as rooted in the traditional rural peasant culture rather than the aristocratic class. This is one of the great understanding of Tolstoy's work, that his philosophy of peace, his philosophy of non-resistance is basically about the peasant way of life rather than the aristocratic class to which Tolstoy belonged. This shows Lenin's Marxist approach of connecting art to social condition, focusing on class dynamics, that how great art thrives on particular social conditions and how class dynamics, they play their role in deciding a particular art's main framework. Lenin also recognized Gorky's artistic talent. Gorky was his contemporary. This time Lenin active politically, Gorky was writing his works and suggested he could contribute to Bolshevik journalism. Bolshevik were those who were against the Tsarist rule, जो revolutionaries थे. So he basically advised and requested Gorky to contribute something to Bolshevik journalism, but still he respected Gorky's need to focus on creative work and did not pressure him to prioritize political writing. Once again, this shows that how Lenin understood the value of a writer's imagination and how writers should be free, liberated from any kind of political pressure. We come to the next ideologist, or we can say political philosopher, that is Leon Trotsky. Unlike Lenin, who focused on political organization, Trotsky, who was a key Marxist leader, he had a great interest, strong interest in literature, and in fact he published a book on the topic Literature and Revolution, which is a significant study and which addressed the challenges faced by Russian writers in the new socialist society after the revolution, when the Tsarist rule regime fell down and when the Bolshevik came to the power. What were the new challenges which were faced by the writers in the completely new atmosphere? Trotsky actually tackled the question. He talked about the carryover value of literature. Carryover value is a concept given by James T. Farrell in A Note on Literary Criticism, that what values does literature from previous historical periods of feudal times have in a new society. Now, previous literature was composed in a society where feudal power or aristocratic people, they ruled. So literature was accordingly written to support those ideas. But now in a new society which is ruled by the Bolshevik, by the common people, what value or does that literature carries from that particular past historical period? Trotsky addressed this issue, which Marx had not deeply explored, because Marx was not a particular literary critic, assuming the values of classics like Shakespeare and Greek art without much elaboration. Marx was rather simple, naive. He praised Shakespeare, Greek art, and without giving deliberation that in which particular political era, who were the rulers when Shakespeare or the Greek art was being created. Russian writers, they questioned the status of bourgeois culture, which was created under capitalism and in a socialist society, and wondered if a new proletarian literature with unique language, style and form would emerge to express the ideals of the socialist revolution. इट वॉज अ जेन्युइन कंसर्न कि जिस तरह से कैपिटलिस्ट सोसाइटी के अंदर जो राइटर्स थे वो कैपिटलिस्ट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से लिखते थे, आफ्टर द बोल्शेविक रेवोल्यूशन, आफ्टर द सोशलिस्ट रेवोल्यूशन, don't we need a new kind of idiom, a new kind of language, a new form, new style that can express the ideals of the socialist revolution, it requires a complete hauling over. पूरी तरह से सब कुछ चेंज करना पड़ेगा. Only then it would be possible to create a real socialist literature. However, Lenin opposed this prolet cult. Prolet cult was a group that aimed to control Soviet literature by creating a purely proletarian culture, proletarian common man, related to common man culture through official policy. जो प्रोलेट कल्ट था वो ये चाहता था कि गवर्नमेंट का इंटरवेंशन हो और गवर्नमेंट टोटल कंट्रोल करे, इंपोज करे सर्टेन रूल्स जिसके अकॉर्डिंग लिटरेचर लिखा जाए, ताकि वो लिटरेचर एक प्रोलेटेरियन कल्चर को ही एंडोर्स करे और एरिस्टोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज को सप्रेस करे. बट Lenin argued that culture should evolve naturally from society's accumulated knowledge and it should not be artificially imposed. In Literature and Revolution, Trotsky also raised another important concern, that he should, the terms like proletarian literature, proletarian culture, they were dangerous because they limited the future of culture to the narrow condition of the present socialist phase. Why? According to dialectical materialism, even that stage was temporary. This Bolshevik क्रांति के बाद जो stage है वो भी temporary है. He envisions a future culture that would transcend class division and it would not be confined to worker focused art, क्योंकि once again the same problem will rise again. Trotsky argued that the illiterate proletariat and peasantry in Russia, उनके पास वो अपॉर्चुनिटी नहीं थी, उनके पास रिसोर्सेज नहीं थे, वो पोटेंशियल नहीं था कि वो डिस्टिंक्ट कल्चर डेवलप कर सके जब वो कैपिटलिस्ट टाइम के अंदर जी रहे थे. And unlike the bourgeois literature that developed over time under capitalism, कैपिटलिज्म के अंदर लंबा पीरियड था, bourgeois कल्चर को टाइम मिला उसको नर्चर होने का, नरिश होने का, डेवलप होने का, लेकिन रशिया की जो वर्कर एंड पीजेंट क्लास है उसके पास वो रिसोर्सेज नहीं थे कि वो बहुत जल्दी शिफ्ट कर सके और एक नए कल्चर को डेवलप कर सके. द टेम्परेरी प्रोलेटेरियन डिक्टेटरशिप जो टेम्परेरी है वुड नॉट लास्ट लॉन्ग, वापिस से क्लास स्ट्रगल होगा. तो जैसा मार्क्सिस्ट थियरी के अंदर बताया गया है, इट वाज अ टेम्परेरी फेज आफ्टर अ सोशलिस्ट रेवोल्यूशन वेयर द वर्किंग क्लास और प्रोलेटेरिएट होल्ड्स द पॉलिटिकल पावर. इट इज अ टेम्परेरी और ए शॉर्ट लिव्ड ड्यूरेशन कॉन्सेप्ट है. देयर विल बी अ टाइम व्हेन अ क्लासलेस ट्रूली ह्यूमन कल्चर वुड एमर्ज, तब जाकर नई कल्चर शेप ले सकती है. तो Trotsky then argued that just as bourgeois literature of the French Revolution ripened under the old regime, socialist literature would grow from existing bourgeois work, adapting their forms and ideas to reflect the new socialist values. It will be organic growth. जैसे फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन के अंदर ओल्ड रेजाइम के अंदर बूर्जुआ लिटरेचर जो था वो डेवलप हुआ और बाद में उन्हीं से फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन के बाद एडेप्ट हो गए न्यू आइडियाज. सिमिलरली जो सोशलिस्ट लिटरेचर है वो पुराने बूर्जुआ वर्क जो एग्जिस्टिंग बूर्जुआ वर्क है उनसे आइडियाज एडेप्ट, उनसे फॉर्म्स एडेप्ट कर नए आइडियाज को प्रेजेंट करेंगे. Trotsky also believed quality of literature or art should be evaluated based on its creativity and aesthetic value, not just by the principle of Marxism. Same thing which first Marx and Engels, then Lenin and Trotsky, they all believed in the same method, that literature and art should be separated from the political ideology. Now Wilson observes that in contrast to the Western countries, literature is typically independent of government control. After the Russian Revolution, various cultural groups in Russia के अलग-अलग cultural groups ने, they tried to dominate literature, they tried to control it either with or sometimes even without Russian government support. And Trotsky Though he was not in favor of these control, but he had to judge literature in his official role, approving or criticizing work to make decision about what literature was acceptable in that particular society, and that is why he unintentionally created tension between freedom and control. In his heart, he knew that literature should be free from the political biasness, but still, in his political role, he was forced to prefer certain literature over the other according to their political ideology. So, this is how there was a tension between freedom and control. In fact, even before the revolution, Russian literature under Tsarist censorship played a unique role. This is always what happens. It embedded means it included political and social criticism in fiction, and writers became expert. जब राइटर्स ओपनली नहीं बोल पाते हैं बिकॉज ऑफ डिक्टेटरशिप, they use indirect and symbolic communication. This led to powerful works by writers like Pushkin and Tolstoy, जिनके पास ये special ability और skill थे that they can imply criticism without directly stating it, and that is these quality made Russian literature exceptional. In 1850s and 60s, for example, Ivan Turgenev's stories, which portrayed rural peasants, they subtly criticized serfdom. जैसे उनकी story A Sportsman's Sketches. It led to censor's dismissal. Censor ने story को dismissal करा क्योंकि they were seen as political messages despite their mild tone. But Wilson shows that how even before Russian Revolution, writers were there who criticized serfdom, who criticized aristocratic class, who criticized the Tsarist dictatorship. It was always there in the literature, not in Russian literature, but literature throughout the world. Then later, when revolutionary intellectuals gained power, then they tried to align literature with political goals. उनका जो particular ideology था, उसको support करने वाले literature को उन्होंने endorse करा. But this often suppressed artistic expression. Artist तो artist है, he or she doesn't go after the particular who is the ruling or dominant party. Writers felt pressurized to conform to the socialist ideals rather than create freely. Lenin, Trotsky, Gorky, they worked to protect literature's freedom as valued free artistic expression. उनको पता था कि in a society कोई भी पावर, पॉलिटिकल पावर रूल करे, an artist should feel free to express himself or herself. But they also recognize the power of art to be used to spread political message, which was a tactic they had seen under the Tsarist censorship. This dual perspective, that artist should be free to create whatever the artist wants, and the art can be used as a vehicle, as a weapon. It shaped their approach to manage Soviet literature. This dual and often contrasting relationship. For example, Lenin saw films as powerful propaganda tools and promoted films to spread socialist ideas. Directors like Eisenstein created films that subtly conveyed revolutionary themes. ये बहुत उसको लगा लेनिन को these are one of the best propaganda machines, तो उसने उनका यूज करा. But after Lenin's death, Trotsky was exiled by Stalin, and Stalin, who was less educated in literature, more politically motivated, he saw art as a way to influence largely uneducated Russian public, and since him, literature became a tool to control public opinion. This is a great shift from Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky to Stalin, who used literature only as a political tool. Gorky advocated for more open cultural policies. He ended RAP. RAP is Russian Association of Proletarian Writers, strict control over literature, because there was a time when RAP decided what can be published and promoted. But Stalin's dictatorship limited the impact of these changes on supporting true artistic vitality. Under Stalin's dictatorship, where political opposition was impossible, nobody can raise voice against him, literature could not engage in political criticism. And what was the result? Post-revolutionary Soviet cinema, theater deteriorated into low-quality propaganda machine, directly reflecting Stalin's latest directive. No writer could dare to write freely, to write something that went against Stalin's instructions. The deaths of Gorky, the imprisonment of Nikolai Bukharin and Karl Radak, these incidents removed key advocates of cultural freedom, and it led to the increased decline in artistic and political integrity. Literature became a slave to the political ideology, more and more slave to the political ideology. Stalin's government deliberately falsified social and political history, which is the first step to change the narrative, constantly rewrote narrative to manipulate public perception, to show them how the previous rulers were totally wrong and how he is totally correct. It corrupted intellectual life, including literature. This forced serious writers either to remain silent or to get exiled, because they could not work in an environment where truth and creativity were suppressed. Now, Wilson argues that the Western thinkers, especially critics from America and Europe, they must develop their own approach to Marxism and literature, or we can say जो Marxism और literature का है उसका रशियन की बजाय एक यूरोपियन point of view है, and the method to assess Marxism relationship with literature using common sense, not just relying on Marxist text. मतलब मार्क्सिस्ट टेक्स्ट ही वो बेसिस नहीं होना चाहिए जिसके बेसिस पे लिटरेचर को एक्सेस करें मार्क्सिस्ट के साथ उसके रिलेशनशिप के लिए. बिकॉज अकॉर्डिंग टू हिम मार्क्सिज्म अलोन कैन नॉट डिटरमाइन, इस आइडियोलॉजी से तो तय कर नहीं सकते वेदर ए वर्क ऑफ आर्ट इज गुड और बैड, बिकॉज even if there is a Marxist critic and that critic doesn't have literary taste, that person cannot distinguish between a high or a poor quality book, because it requires particular literary competency, particular literary taste. Marxism is indeed valuable because it sheds light, ये हमारे को इस बात का आइडिया देता है what is the origins and what are the social significance of artworks, and it also reveals किस तरह से जो artistic creations हैं they are shaped by the particular economic and social conditions. But ऐसा नहीं है कि it was done only after Marxist ideology came into existence. Even long before Marxism, scholars have already explored how literature relates to society. Giambattista Vico, देखिए ये एक इटालियन फिलोसोफर थे. ही वॉज वन ऑफ द फर्स्ट वन हु कनेक्टेड कल्चरल फॉर्म्स टू सोशल डेवलपमेंट एंड स्टडीड हाउ लैंग्वेज एंड लिटरेचर evolve with societies. मतलब इवन लॉन्ग बिफोर मार्क्स एंड एंजल्स, विको जैसे जो फिलोसोफर्स थे उन्होंने इस चीज को रियलाइज करा कि किस तरह से सोसाइटी का डेवलपमेंट कल्चरल फॉर्म को इन्फ्लुएंस करता है. Similarly, German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder, he was a pioneer in studying literature with relationship to society, and he emphasized how cultural products reflect their historical moment. Another critic who believed in the interrelationship of literature and society. Then English critic, romantic critic Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he noted that the structure of Greek sentences, which is very organized, which is very balanced, it reflected the organized society of the Greece. Whereas Chaucer, who is known as the father of English poetry, his short, separate description It showed the particular characteristics of English people of the 14th century, their individuality, and this shows that there is a direct link between the social context and the way a writer writes during that particular period. The French critic Hippolyte Taine, who was also a historian, he developed a method of literary criticism which was based on race, moment, and social milieu. All these works have been done before the advent of Marxism. So we can say that writers and critics both have paid attention to the social milieu of the time. Now, what actually Marx and Engels did, they dived deeper into the study of literature's social context, because they emphasized another factor, the critical role of economic system, and they showed किस तरह से literary production is dependent or is influenced by the economic factors, which was not so distinctively done by the previous critics. The literary opinions of Marx, Engels, then Lenin and Trotsky, they are valuable not because they created Marxism or because they were about the interrelationship of literature and economic conditions, but because they have the fine sense of appreciating literature. They had the aesthetic potency to understand and appreciate literature. But Wilson warns that we cannot blindly go to the Marxist principle without understanding literature, because it can lead to serious errors if we blindfold ourselves and try to judge literature on the basis of Marxist principle. Because a great work of art conveys great complex visions. It is not simple mathematical equations. For example, Engels, he valued Henri Balzac's novel, the French novelist. He valued them for their artistic depth, because even though Balzac supported the old aristocratic, which Engels hated, Émile Zola's democratic ideas fitted better into Engels' philosophy, but he seems less effective because his work was more overtly political. And the famous observation by Engels, the more the novelist allows his political ideas to remain hidden, implicit, indirect, the better it is for the work of art. So Engels clearly understood that the political tone should be undertone, it should not be overtone. Now, in literature and music, according to Engels, even small personal struggles can carry deep moral weight. Now, it is the power of art that it has the ability to make any story relatable to any reader, because it allows readers to connect their own experiences to the work's theme. A reader is basically carried out by the theme of the work, because the reader finds his or her personal life history into that particular work. And art allows readers to apply its moral lesson to their own situations. For example, a story which is about a historical event, let's say French Revolution, first Indian independence, mutiny, but they can inspire modern readers who are living quite later in another historical period, but they can reflect on their own particular challenges, and this makes art universally relevant. This is the view, these are the views of Engels. Now, the moral impact of a work of art, it does not depend on whether its heroes win or lose, which is quite a contradictory. For example, Hemingway's, his short story, The Undefeated. Here, the bullfighter's courage is the real hero, because his courage outstands his humiliation and death in the end. So, even though the hero loses in the struggle, but because of his struggle, because of his courage, he is portrayed as a hero. He gives a message. Now, Soviet critic I. Kashkin noted that Hemingway often wrote about decadence, about declining times, but still his ability to convey life's vitality makes his work powerful. A true genius can express life's essence regardless of the subject, and this makes the work powerful and important, significant for the society. On the other hand, if there are literary critics who doesn't have literary competency, who doesn't know how to assess a literary work, they often try to judge literature using tests that are irrelevant to art. They can use political ideology, economic ideology, but it is not through these that we can assess a true merit of a literary work, because rigid Marxist criteria leads to flawed evaluation. They must ignore some good literary work or overpraise some average literary work if they follow the rigidity of Marxist evaluation, because these critics try to create formulas for ideal Marxist books, but actually these rules are useless. As Burton Rasco, an American literary critic and journalist, he pointed out that rules for art, like those for Greek tragedy, which were framed by Aristotle, they are identified only after the art exists. So basically, what is the equation? First comes the art, then comes the rules, not the vice versa. But Marxist critics, they want to create rules on which art should be created, which according to Burton Rasco is not possible. Marxist critics had rigid ideas. They have very fixed, limited ideas what literature should be, but they didn't find any modern works which can be perfectly fit into their scheme, into their standard. And as in 1933 article, Granville Hicks, The Crisis in Criticism in New Masses, outlined that any ideal Marxist novel should have at least three qualities. It must show the class struggle. It make the readers feel involved in the depicted fictional lives, and it should adopt the perspective of the proletariat vanguard. Vanguard means one who take the advantage, one who is at the forefront of a movement. But at the same time, same Mr. Hicks, he had to admit that no such novel existed which fulfill all these three conditions. This shows that you cannot set the rules and write the literature. It must be in the reverse order. This is what Wilson is trying to say. Critics of different schools have claimed writer idolized past writers according to their particular ideologies. For example, humanists, they claimed Sophocles. They find Sophocles and Shakespeare fit their ideals. Socialist realists claimed Tolstoy as their ideal model, but these writers would not have created under such restrictive rules. If they were told, अगर Sophocles या Shakespeare या Tolstoy को बताया जाता कि आपको इन rules के according लिखना है, you have to live up to the socialist realist prohibitions, यही restrictions है, तो Tolstoy could never have written a chapter. So it cannot be that government or ideology can decide how should literature be written. This is what Wilson is trying to point out. The humanists' misrepresentation of Sophocles, including altering his text to fit their ideals. It is a similar academic mistake because it shows that critics manipulate art to fit their agendas. They like Sophocles, but there are certain sections of his work which doesn't go according to their particular principles. Then they try to alter the text, which basically reduce the beauty of their art. Similarly, American communist critics, which is led by Granville Hicks, they idolize John Donne Passos, the American novelist of 1920s. But they find that he is a communist writer, but Passos identified himself as a middle class liberal, and he wrote about the capital system's effect on the middle class. they have to finally give up their idealized version of Dos Passos, because Passos was severely critical of Stalin's regime, who was the hero of the communists. So this shows that you cannot have a particular ideal writer, because writer is free to follow his own literary vision. Soviet publicity tried to transform Maxim Gorky into an idealized figure to fit the social realist ideal. Once again, this particular example shows that critics distort real writers to match their expectation. Gorky was never such a proletariat writer as he is portrayed by these later critics. Granville Hicks, they tried to create formulas for literature to make it effective tool in the class struggle to actively support the workers' fight against capitalists. But this leads to the dogma that art is also a weapon. Just like a political speech, a novel should work only like a tool in the hand of the public. But Wilson challenges this idea. He says that art can serve political purpose. It is okay, but the lasting value of great works, the Divine Comedy, Shakespeare's play, Milton's poem, does not come from their role as political tool because of their complete पैकेज, अ लिटरेरी पैकेज जिसके अंदर एस्थेटिक वैल्यू होती है. दैट थिंग मेक्स दीज वर्क्स ग्रेट. He gives example of Divine Comedy by Dante, जिसके अंदर हेनरी ऑफ लग्जमबर्ग जो होली रोमन एम्परर थे उसके ऊपर उन्होंने सपोर्ट करा है. दो उससे लगता है कि दांते हैड हिज बिलीफ इन यूनिफाइड यूरोपियन एम्पायर. But it is not because of this political ideal that Divine Comedy has become an everlasting work. It is because of its poetic vision, its grand, its eloquence, its sublimity, not because of its political agenda. Similarly, Shakespeare's Henry IV and Henry V, they supported Elizabethan imperialism. लेकिन जो इसकी लिटरेरी लास्टिंग वैल्यू है, इट इज बिकॉज ऑफ फाल्स्टाफ हु रिवील्स डीपर ह्यूमन स्ट्रगल्स रादर देन सम एक्सप्लिसिट सोशल मॉरल्स. दैट इज व्हाई विल्सन रिमार्क्स Falstaff is the father of Hamlet and all Shakespeare's tragic heroes, who is basically a comic villain. So this shows that a work may have a kind of social or political message, but its true value is in its artistic vision. So for Wilson, great works like Dante or Shakespeare are not weapons or tools. They contribute to the broader struggle of modern European man who is trying to emerge from the Middle Ages and trying to understand the world and the self. Now, very important thing, Wilson tries to distinguish between long range literature, which is broad human experience, and short range literature, which is about political impact of the current. Now, Marxist writers, they are confused whether they should create long range literature about the broad human experience, universal ones, or short range literature which serves their urgent political motives. Now, Marxist critics think that the time of social upheaval or revolution, just like Russian Revolution, it is conducive, it produces new and vital form of literature, क्योंकि उस समय एक एनर्जी होती है सोशल चेंज की, उस एनर्जी से नए आइडियल आ सकते हैं. लेकिन विल्सन इस व्यू को चैलेंज करता है और आर्ग्यू करता है कि ये जो ग्रेट आर्ट के लिए कंडीशंस चाहिए होती है उसको बेसिकली नहीं समझ पाया. क्योंकि एक्चुअल जब रेवोल्यूशन होती है, देयर इज अ chaos, देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स गोइंग ऑन एंड राइटर्स डोंट हैव द टाइम और calmness which is required to create sophisticated works like novel and epic poems. जैसे कि जो फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन का पीरियड था 1789 to 1799, इट प्रोड्यूस्ड लिमिटेड लिटरेरी आउटपुट. या तो दांतन जैसे कि पॉलिटिकल स्पीचेस थी, आंद्रे शेनियर की कुछ पोएम्स थी. अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट देयर वर हार्डली एनी लिटरेरी वर्क्स. सिमिलरली रशियन लिटरेरी वर्क देखें अगर रेवोल्यूशन के टाइम में, तो पॉलिटिकल राइटिंग्स हैं लेनिन और ट्रॉट्स्की की. अलेक्जेंडर्स ब्लॉक की पोएम द 12 है, और उसके बाद जो अपहीवल हुआ वो उसके बाद अलेक्जेंडर ब्लॉक भी ही वाज नॉट एबल टू क्रिएट फर्दर वर्क्स. सिमिलरली टाइम्स ऑफ सोशल टेंशन जो रेवोल्यूशन से पहले होता है, it can inspire great literature, just like in France and England before 1789, इन रशिया बिफोर 1917. लेकिन रशिया का जो लिटरेरी डिक्लाइन है आफ्टर 1905 रेवोल्यूशन, वो ये शो करता है सोशल अनरेस्ट, टाइम ऑफ रेवोल्यूशन इज नॉट एनफ टू सस्टेन ग्रेट आर्ट. नाउ राइटर्स लाइक दांते एंड वर्जिल, दे कैप्चर्ड द स्पिरिट ऑफ देयर चेंजिंग टाइम्स. लेकिन इसका मतलब ये नहीं है दे वर इन फेवर ऑफ रेडिकल चेंजेस, बल्कि उनके वर्क रिफ्लेक्ट करते हैं सोसाइटीज इन डिक्लाइन, नॉट फ्यूचर रेवोल्यूशनरी सोसाइटीज. इससे पता चलता है कि ग्रेट आर्ट ऑफन लुक्स बैक रादर देन पुशेस फॉरवर्ड. इट इज बेसिकली एन एनालिसिस ऑफ व्हाट हैज गॉन बैक. इट वेरी रेयरली प्रेजेंट्स फ्यूचर विजन. तो ये भी एक मिसकॉन्सेप्शन है जो मार्क्सिस्ट क्रिटिक्स को है. इस कारण विल्सन कंक्लूड करता है इस सेंस में, हाईएस्ट क्रिएटिव आर्ट कैन नॉट बी लिंक्ड to the moments of active social change या revolutionary periods because it disrupt, ये सारा बदल देता है उन conditions को which is needed for long range literature. That is why writers should be grateful for the absence of violent revolution. क्योंकि अगर violent revolution हुआ तो राइटर के पास वो peace of mind और rest नहीं होगा, वो एक्चुअल में उनको वो टाइम लिखने से रोकने के ही काम करेगा. जो अर्ली सोवियत राइटर्स थे उन्होंने प्रोलेटेरियन लिटरेचर लिखने की कोशिश करी बाय सिंप्लीफाइंग देयर वोकैब एंड सिंटैक्स, ताकि जो बूर्जुआ इन्फ्लुएंसेस हैं उनको वो रिमूव कर सकें. लेकिन इससे क्या हुआ, उनके वर्क और कंफ्यूजिंग हो गए, जस्ट लाइक द एब्स्ट्रैक्ट पोइट्री व्हिच दे अपोज. तो दिस शोज कि केवल आप उसमें से रिड्यूस करके बूर्जुआ लिटरेचर से वोकैब को रिप्लेस कर दो सिंपल वोकैब से, तो आप एक नया लिटरेचर क्रिएट नहीं कर सकते. मायाकोवस्की जो एक फ्यूचरिस्ट पोएट था, जो सिंपल लैंग्वेज में लिखना चाहता था, जिसने इनिशियली एक्सपेरिमेंट करे, बाद में ही बिकम द पार्ट ऑफ सोवियत कैनन. मतलब he also wrote like those great writers like Pushkin. It shows a shift toward accepting diverse style. ट्रॉट्स्की की एडवाइस को मानते हुए सोवियत कल्चर ने एक प्री रेवोल्यूशनरी जो क्लासिक्स थे, पुश्किन के, टॉल्स्टॉय के, गोर्की के, फॉरेन बुर्जुआ लिटरेचर के जो थे और स्किल्ड रेवोल्यूशनरी राइटर्स थे, उनको बेस बनाते हुए अपना लिटरेचर क्रिएट करने की कोशिश करी. टॉल्स्टॉय, who adopted peasant ways, engaged in manual labor, though he belonged to aristocracy, carpentry, cobbling, plowing to क्यों करा उसने? टू ब्रिज द गैप बिटवीन द मासेस. सोवियत राइटर्स जो एक एजुकेटेड माइनॉरिटी है, मतलब मोस्ट पॉपुलेशन ऑफ सोवियत इज अनएजुकेटेड, इलिटरेट, एंड दे स्ट्रगल. ये जो माइनॉरिटी थी एजुकेटेड राइटर्स की, उस इलिटरेट मेजॉरिटी से कनेक्ट करने के लिए क्या कर रही थी? स्ट्रगल कर रही थी. देयर वाज अ वाइड गल्फ बिटवीन दीज टू क्लासेस. इसके कॉन्ट्रास्ट में अमेरिका के अंदर, जिसमें केवल 4% इलिटरेसी है, जो कम्युनिकेशन है सोशल ग्रुप्स में वो ज्यादा इजियर है, बिकॉज एवरीवन इज ऑलमोस्ट एजुकेटेड. H.L. मेंकन्स का द अमेरिकन लैंग्वेज जो ऐसे है, वो रिफ्लेक्ट करता है कैसे राइटर्स कनेक्ट करते हैं डाइवर्स ऑडियंसेस से, जबकि रशिया के अंदर लार्ज इलिटरेट पॉपुलेशन है, वो एक डिवाइड को क्रिएट करती है. सो अमेरिकन लिटरेचर ड्यूरिंग द इकोनॉमिक बूम एंड डिप्रेशन, उसने इंडस्ट्रियल और रूरल लाइफ को एड्रेस करा फ्रॉम पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ वर्कर्स एंड फार्मर्स. इसके साथ व्हाइट कॉलर वर्कर्स, मर्चेंट्स, साइंटिस्ट, मिलानियर्स इन क्राइसिस, जिनको हम प्रोलेटेरियन लिटरेचर कह सकते हैं, क्योंकि वहां राइटर और जो पढ़ने वाले रीडर थे वो वर ऑन द सेम एजुकेशन लेवल. रॉबर्ट कैंटवेल्स की द लैंड ऑफ प्लेंटी, अ स्ट्राइक नॉवल बाय अ फॉर्मर मिल वर्कर, ड्रॉ सिग्निफिकेंटली फ्रॉम द स्टाइल ऑफ हेनरी जेम्स, जो शो करता है क्लासिकल राइटर अमेरिकन और जो प्रोलेटेरियन लिटरेचर है वो लगभग एक ट्रेडिशन को फॉलो कर रहे हैं. तो अमेरिकन प्रोलेटेरियन लिटरेचर बिल्ड्स ऑन द एस्टेब्लिश्ड लिटरेरी ट्रेडिशन. लेकिन मार्क्सिज्म ऐसा नहीं कर पाया. अकॉर्डिंग टू विल्सन, मार्क्सिज्म में एक बात तो यूनिक है, इट इज द फर्स्ट फिलोसॉफिकल सिस्टम दैट लीड्स टू द पॉलिटिकल एक्शन. मतलब ये केवल एक थियोरेटिकल आइडियोलॉजी नहीं है, इट ब्रिजेस द गैप बिटवीन थॉट, आइडिया एंड प्रैक्टिस. इन दिस सेंस इट इज रादर यूनिक. आंद्रे मेलरॉ जो फ्रेंच राइटर थे लेकिन साथ में पॉलिटिकल एक्टिविस्ट थे. ही ऑल्टरनेट हिज रोल बिटवीन क्रिएटिंग फिक्शन of revolutionary themes and engaging in revolutionary actions, flying for Spanish Civil War. That is how he combined serious literary work by writing novels and direct political action. Vincent Sheehan, who was an American journalist and writer, he also tried to compare Lenin's Marxist vision to Dante's visionary poetry. और उसने नोट करा कि they are shared compelling force, दोनों करते हैं, लेकिन लेनिन का जो वर्क था वो सोशल इंजीनियरिंग से रिलेटेड था, जबकि दांते जो था वो केवल लिटरेरी आर्ट था. ट्रॉट्स्की उसने एक स्टेप आगे लिया. उसने सोचा कि कम्युनिस्ट जो है वो सोसाइटी को ही एक आर्टिस्टिक क्रिएशन बना देता है कलेक्टिव एक्शन के माध्यम से, लेकिन जो इनिशियल एफर्ट होते हैं वो बेसिकली इम्परफेक्ट होते हैं बिकॉज देयर आर चैलेंजेस ऑफ रीशेपिंग complex human societies. This represents a shift from creating art about life to creating life itself as art. ये ट्रॉट्स्की का विजन था जिसको वो अप्लाई करना चाहता था. लेकिन विल्सन नोट करते हैं मार्क्सिस्ट फिलॉसफी जो हिस्ट्री को कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ड्राइवन प्रोसेस मान के चलती है, वो कुछ ऐसे अनरियलिस्टिक आइडियल्स में बिलीव करती है, कुछ ऐसे मिथ्स में बिलीव करती है जिसके कारण वो ब्लाइंडेड हो जाती है, डॉगमेटिक फेथ को फॉलो करने लगती है, एक क्रिएटिव फोर्स नहीं रह जाती है. और ये जो डॉगमेटिक बिलीफ है ये लिटरेचर के फ्रीडम को कंट्रोल करने काम आते हैं. और विल्सन का ये मानना है कि जैसे जैसे पीपल विल गेन पावर टू रीशेप सोसाइटी, आर्ट में इवॉल्व बियॉन्ड बुक्स एंड पोएम्स. ये जो ट्रॉट्स्की का विजन था कि लाइफ ही आर्ट बन जाएगी, तो हो सकता है रियल लाइफ को वो ऐसे इन्फ्लुएंस करे जैसा अभी तक हमने इमेजिन नहीं करा है. और विल्सन कंक्लूड करता है ऐसे को पॉइंटिंग आउट करके, दिस ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन ऑफ आर्ट एंड सोसाइटी, इट्स नॉट अ वेरी शॉर्ट प्रोसेस, इट्स अ लॉन्ग टर्म प्रोसेस, विल टेक एजेस. लेकिन राइटर्स एंड रीडर्स मस्ट रिकॉग्नाइज अर्ली एफर्ट्स जो अभी इम्परफेक्ट हो सकते हैं, जो कन्वेंशनल लिटरेचर जिसका एक लिमिटेड रोल है उससे परे जाने की कोशिश करते हैं. तो दोस्तों ये था ये लॉन्ग ऐसे मार्क्सिज्म एंड लिटरेचर एडमंड विल्सन का. उसने अपने सारे व्यूज प्रेजेंट करे इसके अंदर एंड रिगार्डिंग हिस्ट्री, किस तरह से मार्क्स एंजल्स ये लोग थे. आई होप यू लाइक दिस लेक्चर, यू गॉट टू अंडरस्टैंड द की आइडियाज. कीप वॉचिंग, कीप सपोर्टिंग. थैंक यू डियर फ्रेंड्स.